You were kind, you were patient, you gave more than you had. And for some reason, it still wasn't enough. You didn't do it for attention. You weren't trying to prove anything. You just thought that being good would be enough. That if you kept showing up, kept giving, kept forgiving, the world would finally turn around and say, I see you. I appreciate you. You matter. But it never did. The truth is, the more you gave, the more they expected. The more you understood, the more they took. And somewhere along the line, you started disappearing. Not physically, but in spirit. The more agreeable you became, the more invisible you became. And the worst part? You started blaming yourself for it. You wondered, am I not good enough? No. The real question is, when did being good become the same as being easy to ignore? This is the quiet punishment of goodness in a world that only respects consequence, a world that confuses stillness with weakness, softness with submission. And you, somewhere deep down, you knew this. You felt it in the moments where your silence echoed louder than your words, in the tension of holding back what you really wanted to say, in the way people started to assume your yes was guaranteed, that your time, your patience, your presence were all on demand. But let me ask you something. When was the last time they asked how you were doing? When was the last time someone said, you've been carrying too much? Let me take something off your shoulders. When was the last time someone thanked you not for what you gave, but for who you are? You already know the answer. And this is where Stoicism begins. Not in denial, not in detachment, but in recognition. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, but more importantly, he ruled himself. In his private journals, never meant for publication, he wrote, "Do not waste what remains of your life in speculating about others. It is not the actions of others that disturb us, but our own judgments." He didn't say this from a mountain. He said this from within chaos. Betrayal, plague, famine, war. Yet, he remained still. Not silent, not passive, still. Because he understood something you were never taught. The world doesn't respect people who give everything. It respects people who know what not to give. You thought if you were good enough, kind enough, helpful enough, they'd notice. But they didn't. Because you never gave them a reason to. There was no weight to your no, no pause in your silence, no cost to your compliance. And in a world that runs on leverage, being good with no boundaries is the fastest way to become replaceable. That's a hard truth. But Stoicism never cared about comfort. It cares about clarity. It doesn't promise a peaceful world. It promises that you can be unshaken by it. You keep asking why they treat you this way. But maybe the answer isn't out there. Maybe the answer is in what you allow. What if I told you that every time you said yes to something that made you shrink, every time you swallowed your anger just to be liked, every time you were available to people who were never available for you, you were training the world how to treat you? Seneca once wrote, "He who is too busy doing good has no time to be good to himself." Think about that. You are not respected for being exhausted. You're not honored for being overextended. The world doesn't reward your sacrifice unless that sacrifice has edge, intention, presence. Right now, you're probably remembering all the times you stayed late, said yes when you meant no, showed up when you were drained, all the things you did, hoping they'd finally notice. They didn't. And now you know why. Because you gave without measure, spoke without force, stood in rooms without anchoring your feet. But that changes now. Because the Stoics didn't teach you to become bitter. They taught you to become immovable, not loud, not aggressive, not cold, unmoved. When Epictetus was still a slave, he realized something most free men never do. You cannot control how the world sees you, but you can control how much of yourself you give away. That is what makes you free. So let me leave you with this. If you've been dismissed, disrespected, overlooked, it's not because you're not enough. It's because you never made your boundaries known. You never made your presence felt. You never became the type of good that cannot be used. Being good without presence is like a lighthouse with no light. It's structure without signal, form without consequence, and the world doesn't sail toward structure. It sails toward what it cannot ignore. You weren't born needing people to like you. You didn't enter the world worried about your tone, your posture, or if your kindness would be misunderstood. That came later, after the corrections, after the conditioning, after the world taught you something dangerous, that to be loved, you must be agreeable. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in whispers. Don't say that. You're being difficult. Be nice. And so you learned. You learned to smile when something hurt, to nod when something felt wrong, to apologize for things that weren't your fault, not because you were weak, but because you were trying to survive, trying to stay connected, trying to avoid conflict, trying to be enough in a world that seemed allergic to honesty. And somewhere along the way, you started calling that survival virtue. But the Stoics would tell you otherwise. They'd call it by its real name, weak assent. A betrayal of your prohairesis, your rational faculty, your will, your inner authority. Because that's what it is when you nod to keep the peace, when your lips move before your mind has spoken, when you offer yourself in pieces to people who have no idea what it costs. You weren't trying to deceive anyone. You were trying to protect something. Your relationships, your place in the room, your idea of being a good person. But let's ask the harder question. Who taught you that being good means being silent? That kindness must be bought with exhaustion? That love must be earned with obedience? This is the lie that has turned so many into ghosts while still alive. And the more agreeable you become, the more invisible you feel. You don't set boundaries because you're afraid to lose people. You keep saying yes because you fear the cold edge of disapproval. You give away your time, your energy, your truth, just to avoid that look, the look that says, you're selfish. But let me tell you something the Stoics knew, even when the world around them collapsed. Being disliked is not death. Being false to yourself is. Marcus Aurelius never prayed to be admired. He prayed to be clear, just, aligned. Seneca never asked the crowd to understand him. He studied himself. He said, "Let your soul stand firm and take root." They weren't chasing applause. They were building unshakable ground. You've been taught to perform goodness, to wear it like a costume, smile when it hurts, soften when you want to scream, disappear politely so others can be comfortable. But here's the truth you were never told. Virtue that depends on being liked is not virtue. It's compliance. And compliance is never respected. You think being good will protect you from conflict, but conflict still comes. It just finds you in silence, tired, resentful, worn thin. There's a reason why you feel angry when you give too much. It's your soul knocking on the inside of your ribs saying, "I'm still here, I still matter." But you push it down. Again, because you think being kind means being quiet. No, kindness without honesty is self-erasure. Kindness without boundaries is self-destruction. Kindness without clarity is not stoic. It's slavery. And slavery, no matter how pretty the disguise, is the opposite of freedom. Ask yourself this: why does saying no make you feel guilty? Why does disagreeing feel like betrayal? Why does self-respect feel like selfishness? Because somewhere along the way, you were taught to abandon yourself as a requirement for acceptance. And now, you can't even tell the difference between love and dependence. But the Stoics can. They understood the trap. Epictetus lived it, born into chains, but he saw through them. Not the ones on his hands, the ones they wanted to place on his mind. He said, "No man is free who is not master of himself. Not the man who is liked, not the man who is praised. Only the man who owns his judgment. The world may misunderstand your clarity. Let it. They may call your truth selfish. Let them. They may call your strength cold, so be it. Because the moment you stop performing, you start living. And in that moment, something shifts. You realize the crowd's approval never gave you peace. It only gave you permission to stay small, to hide behind their comfort, to erase yourself just enough to be allowed in. But Stoicism doesn't ask you to be allowed. It asks you to stand, not in defiance, in truth, in rooted, reasoned alignment with who you are and what you will not betray. And once you reclaim that, you stop chasing people who only loved your compliance. You stop apologizing for your presence. You stop mistaking silence for wisdom. You learn to walk into a room not hoping to be liked, but carrying the weight of a person who cannot be bought. That is where your power begins. They told you to be nice, to be flexible, understanding, forgiving. They never told you that being too agreeable makes you easy to overlook, easy to use, easy to discard. You grew up believing that if you were kind, people would treat you well, that if you showed up for others, they'd show up for you, that if you never crossed anyone, no one would cross you. But that's not what happened, is it? You gave your time freely. You explained yourself politely. You smiled through discomfort. And yet, the people you protected never protected you. The respect you thought you were earning never came. Why? Because kindness without boundary becomes permission. And when you have no cost, you are cheap to the world. This isn't cynicism. This is clarity. The kind of clarity the Stoics spent their lives cultivating, not in temples or books, but in the arena of human behavior. Marcus Aurelius knew it. He wrote in Meditations, "Waste no time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." But being good, to Marcus, didn't mean being weak. It didn't mean giving in. It meant standing firm in your principles, quiet, unwavering, immovable. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. The world does not reward your softness. It rewards your structure. It doesn't test the ones who draw clear lines. It tests the ones who don't. Look around. The people who are respected are not the most generous. They're the ones who are clear. Clear in their time, clear in their speech, clear in what they tolerate and what they do not. You can call it strength. You can call it presence. The Stoics called it virtue with edge. Epictetus said, "You are a soul carrying a corpse." His point? Don't forget what you are. A reasoning being, not a doormat. He didn't preach rudeness. He preached sovereignty. But you've mistaken availability for love. You thought if you gave more, they'd see your value. But the ones who take, they only see how much you'll let them. That's why boundaries are not barriers. They're declarations. A line not drawn in anger, but in self-respect. And here's the paradox. The world will always test the limits of your kindness until it meets something firmer than kindness. Not anger, not aggression. Principle. The quiet, grounded Stoic principle that says, "I will not abandon myself for your comfort. I will not trade my peace for your approval. I will not allow you to shape me into something I no longer recognize." You're not cold for setting limits. You're clear. You're not cruel for saying no. You're conscious. You're not selfish for protecting your energy. You're Stoic. Because the Stoics never confused tolerance with virtue. Seneca, who lived in the heart of Rome's political venom, said it clearly. Kindness is only noble when it is paired with wisdom. And wisdom means discernment. Knowing who is worthy of your time. Knowing when your yes becomes self-betrayal. Knowing that sometimes silence enables harm. That's why people respected Seneca, not because he smiled for the crowd, but because he walked with edge, quietly, intelligently. On his terms. You want to be respected? Then understand this. Respect isn't given to the agreeable. It's given to the anchored. The man who speaks little but means everything he says. The woman who helps, but never at the expense of her values. The friend who shows up, but only for those who respect their presence. These are the people others think twice before crossing. Not because they're feared, but because they are grounded. And grounded people do not flinch. You've tried the other way. You made yourself small. You explained yourself to people who were never listening. You stayed in rooms that drained you, in relationships that used you, in cycles that kept telling you, maybe next time they'll appreciate me. They didn't. They won't. Not until you make your presence carry weight. The Stoics were not loved by everyone, but they were respected. Because they drew lines, not in fire, but in stone. When Marcus Aurelius faced betrayal, he didn't scream. He stood firm. He said, "Do not return insult for insult. That is not our way." That wasn't passivity. That was command. That was composure under pressure. That was boundaried power, the kind the world cannot shake. You don't need to become hard. You need to become defined, because definition is clarity, and clarity is strength. So let me ask you now, who gets the right to your time? Who gets the privilege of your help? Who gets the presence of your silence? If the answer is everyone, then your value is invisible. But the moment you become selective, the moment you say, "I no longer give myself to people who don't see me," that's when they start paying attention. That's when the world learns the lesson. Not from your speech, from your stillness. So what now? You've seen what happens when you're too available. You've tasted the bitterness of giving too much. You've been ignored, misunderstood, used. And now something inside you whispers, never again. But be careful, because what comes next is a crossroads. Many, after being broken by the world's disregard, choose the wrong kind of armor. They stop being kind altogether. They stop trusting. They stop caring. They build walls, not boundaries. They call it self-protection, but really, it's just pain wearing pride as a disguise. And that's not the Stoic path either. The Stoic path is not about becoming untouchable. It's about becoming uncorrupted. There's a difference. Bitterness is a reaction. Wisdom is a choice. The first is loud, defensive, sharp. The second is quiet, clear, measured. Stoicism doesn't ask you to stop caring. It asks you to care precisely, with discernment, with edge, with awareness. Epictetus said, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them." He didn't say numb yourself. He said, understand yourself, master your perceptions, refine your responses, guard your peace not with aggression, but with precision. You're not here to become cold, you're here to become clear. So let's begin. Let's start rebuilding your life, not on fear, not on resentment, but on reasoned choice. The Stoics called it prohairesis, your ability to choose your inner attitude no matter what the world throws at you. It's what makes you free, not your circumstances, your command of response. So how do you reclaim yourself without losing your heart? First, stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Every time you justify your boundary to someone who mocks it, you weaken it. Every time you explain your no to someone who never says thank you, you shrink your clarity into apology. But the Stoic does not plead. The Stoic declares. Not with drama, with finality. A simple no, a calm silence, a redirection of presence. That is how you begin to reclaim your self-respect. Second, refuse without guilt. A Stoic doesn't react. A Stoic decides. And decision means sometimes walking away, not out of spite, but out of alignment. If something is not yours to carry, put it down. If someone treats your time like it's free, charge them silence. If a room shrinks you, leave before it teaches you to shrink permanently. Third, watch who gets uncomfortable with your clarity. They'll call you changed, selfish, harsh. They'll say, "You're not who you used to be." Good, because the person you used to be was starving, giving too much, waiting to be seen by people who only see what they can take. And now you're different. Now you know that self-respect is not selfish, it's sacred. You're learning to filter, not apologize, to listen to your own logos, your inner compass, more than the noise around you. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Just that you do the right thing, the rest doesn't matter." That's what makes a Stoic. Not perfection, not applause, alignment. You don't need a speech. You don't need to convince anyone. You don't need permission. You need a spine made of reason and a life lived on principle. You can still be kind. You can still care. You can still help. But now it will come from strength, not fear. From clarity, not confusion. From overflow, not obligation. And this is what the world starts to feel. When your silence is intentional, when your presence has weight, when your yes is sacred and your no is final. They notice. They may not like it, but they respect it. That's the shift. You're no longer trying to be agreeable. You're no longer bending for approval. You're no longer performing goodness. You're becoming whole. And wholeness is quiet. Wholeness is grounded. Wholeness doesn't chase. Now, you may lose people. That's true. But let me remind you, what you lose by being true was never yours to keep. Your presence will filter the room. And that's what it's supposed to do. Some will leave. Let them. Because the ones who stay, they'll see you, not as a tool, not as a convenience, but as a person, a whole person. A person who can say no without guilt. A person who can stand in truth without trembling. A person who helps, loves, forgives, without becoming hollow. And that is Stoic power. Not the power to dominate, the power to define, to shape your life with reason, to walk through the world without asking to be allowed, to stop proving your worth and start living it. Now we arrive at the quietest part of this journey, the place beyond anger, beyond disappointment, beyond the ache of being unseen. You've stood at the edge of bitterness and chosen not to jump. You've set boundaries without burning bridges. You've refused without cruelty. You've remembered who you were before the world convinced you to forget. And now, there's only one thing left: to live. Not perform, not survive, but live. To walk through life as the Stoics did, not untouched by chaos, but unmoved by it. Not because you're numb, but because you've stopped trading your peace for things that never deserved it. This is the return to stillness, a stillness earned through fire. Not a weakness, but a weapon. The kind of strength no one sees coming because it doesn't shout, it doesn't flex, it doesn't need to. It speaks in presence, it walks in clarity, it breathes in alignment. Seneca said, "As long as you live, keep learning how to live." And this is how you live now, not trying to fix how others see you, not bending for approval, not trying to be palatable. You live like a rock in the river, unshaped by the current, unbothered by the rush. Still, rooted, present. This is where everything begins to change, because the world only truly respects what it cannot shake. People won't always like you. Some will resist your silence. Others will mistake your boundaries for coldness. Some will call your distance arrogance. They'll say, "You used to be different." And you'll smile. Because they're right. You are different. Not because you became hard, but because you became defined. The one who doesn't flinch. The one who doesn't argue. The one who doesn't explain. The one who simply lives so clearly that explanation is no longer required. The Stoics were never chasing image. They were chasing essence. Marcus Aurelius didn't write for an audience. He wrote to remind himself how not to be swallowed by a world that worships noise. You don't need applause. You don't need to be liked. You need to be anchored. So ask yourself one last time, what kind of presence are you cultivating? One that adjusts to every expectation. One that apologizes for existing. One that needs to be invited to take up space, or one that arrives with stillness. The kind that says nothing, but is felt. The kind that makes others straighten their posture when you enter the room, not out of fear, but out of respect. Because you didn't demand it, you became it. Through discipline, through principle, through the invisible internal work that no one will see, but everyone will feel. And here's the secret. You don't have to do anything extra to be this. You don't have to add more noise. You just have to subtract what was never you. The need to please, the need to perform, the need to be chosen. You are already chosen by the only one who matters, yourself. So walk the rest of your path like a Stoic. Speak less, mean more. Give carefully, withdraw wisely. Protect your silence like a kingdom. Because it is. It's where your strength lives. And in a world that constantly tries to test your kindness, mock your boundaries, and exploit your patience, that strength will be the only thing they respect. So let them misunderstand you. Let them gossip. Let them whisper. And you? You keep walking, chin steady, eyes clear, spine straight, not angry, not afraid, just done. Done asking for permission, done proving your goodness, done living at a discount. The world doesn't respect good people until those good people remember their power. And when they do, they don't need the world's respect because they finally have their own.